Dear friends and colleagues, welcome to this webinar on modeling greenhouse gas emissions from urban wastewater systems, state of the art and beyond. My name is Dr. Ulf Jeppsson. I'm the chair of the Modeling and Integrated Assessment Specialist Group of IWA. And before we start the actual webinar, I will take an opportunity to say just a few words about the MIA modeling group. And after that, the chair of the Instrumentation, Control and Automation Specialist Group will also say a few words. And then the webinar kicks off in full speed. I should mention that this webinar is then a joint venture between two specialist groups of IWA, Modeling and Integrated Assessment and Instrumentation, Control and Automation. The MIA Modeling Specialist Group is the MIA Specialist Group is the specialist group within IWA, the International Water Association, that is completely devoted to modeling of water and wastewater systems and all aspects that are related to that modeling. We try to be a highly active specialist group, and we currently have some 1,900 members. We work through different pathways. But one of the most important things that we do is that we have quite a large number of task groups. Task groups are small specialist groups that work on a specific topic for a few years, and then after that normally present a scientific and technical report within IVA Publishing. We have, as you can see to the left, we have a number of task groups that have finished, some of them quite recently. And we have the generalized and physicochemical modeling task group, which is basically finished. The scientific and technical report is in press. And we have two task groups that are fully active and doing the work. Apart from task groups, we also work with working groups. Working groups is something fairly similar to task groups, but normally it's a larger group of people working on a kind of more general theme and promoting it, writing white papers and so on. And the working groups normally don't have a time limit. And we have 3 such working groups under the umbrella of the MIA Specialist Group. Finally, we have conferences that we organize. And for the MIA group, we have the WRR Mod conference and the Watermatics conference. Those are our two key conferences. I also want to mention that this scientific and technical report on uncertainty and risk that was just recently made open access. We tried to publish as much as possible as open access, so it is free to download electronically from IVA Publishing, starting from a couple of weeks ago. So we're really happy about that. And speaking about conferences, we have our next main event is the Water Resource Recovery Modeling Seminar, WRR Mod, which will be held in Stellenbosch in South Africa, 18th to 21st of January next year. So we're getting very close. Note also that the dates for that conference was changed a couple of months ago. Just a few days change, but be aware of the new dates. We also have the Watermatics 2023, our symposium on modeling and integrated assessment. That will be done in Quebec City in Canada. And the dates have now been defined, at least preliminary, to the 23rd to the 27th of September 2023. And finally, we have already started the preparations for the WRR Mod conference in 2024. And most likely that conference will be held in Stove in Vermont in the US. if no one hears about what we're doing within the specialist group, then we hardly exist. We have to make it available what is happening. And for that reason, we have a number of social media channels. We have the traditional IWA Connect for IWA members. We also have a LinkedIn group for the MIA specialist group, and a Twitter account where we communicate. And we also actually have an open website for non-IWA members, which basically contains the same information as the IWA Connect webpage. And then, of course, we have newsletters. We set up these type of webinars as you're listening today, which will also then be available on our YouTube channel. And we have a full digital archive of most of our conferences from the year 2020 and onwards. And with that, I leave the floor to Dr. Janelle Alferez, who is the chair of the ICA Specialist Group, to say a few words.
Thank you, Ulf. My name is Janelle Alferez, as you've mentioned. I am the chair of the IWA Instrumentation Control and Automation Specialist Group. Basically, I will also say a few words about what is about this group. So we are actually an internal discussion forum that works in 3 different areas. So we intend to collect and exchange methodologies and experience in all what aspects related with the instrumentation, control, and automation for water systems. So we work toward acknowledgement, sharing. Also, we collect and summarize and publish practical experience, all what is about support and promote the use of ICA in practice. So we work towards disseminations. And we also highlight and touch all what are related with socio-economic and sustainability aspects of ICA as well. So we work towards application actually of all these aspects in real life. Next, please, Ulf. Also, just to say in a nutshell, a few words about what are our main activities. So we actually try to update the different social media and channels with relevant information on all what is about the ICA for water systems. We also prepare biannual newsletters about the group and all what is the relevant information for the group. We also organize and support conferences and workshops, also support task groups, working groups, and clusters. We also organize webinars, and this is an example of that in a joint venture with MIA in this case. And we also encourage publication of related papers and conference and scientific journals with all aspects of ICA for water systems as well. And we also promote partnerships and relationships with industry organizations working in similar topics and in topics where we have some synergies, for example, with the Smart Water Network Forum. Next, Ulf. Just to give you a short update on one of the main current activities. So we have, for example, the current task group on metadata. Is a group really working on metadata collection and organization. The outcome of this group will be a STR that is currently in preparation and that will be available hopefully at the end of this year or beginning next year. We also are working on the preparation of other workshops or other webinars, for example, related to advanced nitrogen removal control and advanced biological nutrient removal control. And our main conference will be, well, a little bit far from now because we just held the previous one, but our official next conference will be in 2025 in Oslo, Norway, with Harna Scharner from the Norway University of Life Science as a chair. Also, we are visible in different social media, as mentioned before, and you can contact us through our main channel, that is the IWA Connect or IWA Connect. As you can see the address But also we have other channels where we are putting information regularly. We have the LinkedIn page, the Twitter, and also the YouTube channel. And we are currently working towards a website where we will also open up a little bit more of our tasks and all what is going on in the world of ICA for water systems. You can also contact directly if you have any question, of course, you want to join or the group, or also if you want to share any type of experience or information with us. Thank you very much and enjoy the webinar.
Then we leave the floor now to Dr. Liu Ye from University of Queensland in Australia. She will introduce the topic of today and be the moderator during the webinar. So I wish you all a fruitful webinar.
Thanks, Of. Hello, everyone. My name is Liu Ye. I'm an associate professor in University of Queensland. And also, I'm the lead editor of this recently published IWA Open Access book on quantification and modeling of fugitive greenhouse gas emissions from urban water systems. Together, we also have Jose Porro and also Inma Nopens as the co-editors. So next slide. Thanks. Yeah, so following the publish of this book, we have organized a series of GHG webinars this year. So the first 4 has been organized from April to August this year. You can see these are the webinars, and if you want to watch any of these, so you can just Google them. It's all recorded and available online to watch. So today, this will be another webinar following this webinar series. So we will focus on the modeling part in this book. Next slide. Yes. So today we have 5 speakers. Basically, we are looking at the 2 potent greenhouse gas, the methane and nitrous oxide. So for methane emission, we will be looking at the sewer collection system, and then later on we will focus nitrous oxide emissions. So in today's webinar, so this session will be recorded, and when the speaker is talking, that you will see their camera is open, but for all the audience, that your microphone and webinar and your cameras will be disabled. The normal chat function is also disabled. If you have any questions, please put your question in the Q&A session. So this is monitored, and all the presenters, they will try to follow your questions after their presentation, and I will also moderate the questions. Some of the questions, if they are not easy to reply in written, we will mark it and we will reply orally. So the Q&A sessions will be held at the end of this, of all the 5 speakers finish their presentation. Okay, so I will start to introduce the first speaker today, Dr. Keshab Sharma. So Dr. Keshab Sharma is my colleague and also a senior research fellow at Australia Centre for Water and Environmental Biotechnology. Previously, it's called also named as AWMC at UQ. So Keshab's research interests include the sewer process modeling, odor and corrosion control, greenhouse gas emissions from the wastewater collection systems. So he is also one of the developer of the Sewer X model, as well as the tools for counting methane emissions from wastewater collection systems. So next, I will leave it to Keshab to talk about methane emissions from the sewers.
Thank you, Liu, for the introduction. I would like to thank EMEA specialist group and ICA specialist group for inviting me to give this presentation. In today's presentation, I'm going to talk about the modeling of methane emission from sewer systems, the model development and its application. So I'll be brief. I won't go through the details of the modeling and the application part. I'll just give you a high-level summary of what has been done and how we can make use of those tools that we have developed. As we all know that the IPCC doesn't really account for the IPCC guideline doesn't account for the methane emission from sewer systems because it's assumed that the sewer doesn't contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. However, the data collected from different sewer systems have shown that the methane concentration in sewer system could be pretty high. We have measured dissolved methane concentration up to 20-25 milligram per liter in some of the rising mains, as well as gas phase methane concentration up to 50,000 ppm in some cases. It's pretty high. Yes, there's a greenhouse gas emission, the methane emission from sewer system, but how do we quantify? The sewers are distributed systems. They cover a large area, and the methane is emitted everywhere along the sewer network. So it is not easy to quantify the greenhouse gas emission or methane emission from sewer system through direct measurements, like as in the case of wastewater treatment plants. So only tool that we have got is a model, and mathematical model plays a major role in greenhouse gas inventory for wastewater system. We had developed this SUEX model a long time ago. It's a dynamic sewer process model for predicting hydrogen sulfide. Then we realized that methane is an important part of this sewer processes, and then we added few components, the components for methane production from sewer biofuel to that model. That was in 2009, and this model was based on the ADM1 model components for methane production, and the parameters of this model was calibrated based on the laboratory data. The model was later validated using the field data. So this is just a summary of what is included in that the process model for methane generation. We all know that both methanogens and SRBs, they compete for hydrogen and acetate. That's why we need to consider both processes. This model considers the competition for substrate, common substrates, and also includes the very typical anaerobic processes like acidogenesis, the methanogenesis using hydrogen and using acetate as substrates, and also the sulfate reduction using hydrogen, acetate, and propionate. So these are the processes included in this model. So talking about validation of the model, we use data from different source systems to validate the model. As I said earlier, this is a dynamic model that takes into account the dynamics of the flow of variation in sewer systems, dynamics in the changes in wastewater composition as well. So the figure on the left-hand side is the data collected from Gold Coast in Australia, and this is how the model predictions compare with the measured data here. The figure on the right is data collected from a system in Spain, and here again we have compared the model predicted methane concentrations with the field measured data, and if you look at the comparison there, it is not perfect, but it is reasonable. So that gives us some sort of confidence that the model that we have developed here can predict methane concentration in real sewer pipes. Taking this further, what we have done is we had a long-term measurement campaign carried out in one of the rising main system in Gold Coast, Australia, using online digital methane sensor. And that study lasted for a month. We had a regular measurement of digital methane concentration for a month, and we compared the data that was measured there with the model predictions, and this is how the comparison looks like. So again, this was a part of our validation study, and it aids to the confidence of the confidence that the model can predict real methane concentration, methane production in the real sewer system. Okay, now what are the challenges? Well, we have got a process model, pretty comprehensive model, with a large number of variables, a large number of parameters, a large number of processes. But this mechanistic model is too complex for its application to large sewer networks, mainly because it requires large quantity of data, which are not available with the utilities. Also, the whole process is quite time consuming and resources intensive. So we need to have a simplified approach. And that approach is basically an empirical model. So there are a number of empirical models available. These models are developed based on the very limited field data. There's a model by Foley in 2009. There's a model by Kul in 2014. There's another model by Shu in 2018. These models are more or less very similar in their structure. They take into account the variation of HRT in the sewer pipe and also the pipe diameter in terms of A-B ratio. Right. So, but we here tried a very different approach. What we tried is we generated a large database of the sewer properties like length, diameter, slope, daily flow rates, diurnal variation, temperatures, etc. And then we applied our the detailed SUX model to predict methane concentration for each set of this data. And that data was used to generate a simplified model, again, based on some fundamentals. I'll talk about that in my next slide. And then at the end, we could have a very simple equation that takes into account some of the key parameters of the sewer system. And then we can apply that model to calculate methane production in each of the pipe, and then we can sum up them together to find out total methane production and hence the emission from an entire sewer network. So that's the process we took for gravity sewer, and similar process was taken for the rising main sewer, although there were some changes in the variables. So this is how we actually developed this model. The theta, the angle that is used in sewer hydraulics, can be related to flow, can be related to diameter and slope using a nonlinear relationship shown here. Once we know theta, we can calculate biofilm area, we can calculate the rate of methane production, and at the end we get this very simplified equation: K is a constant times Q raised to power alpha, D raised to power beta, and S raised to power gamma. And all these parameters can be determined through nonlinear regression of the data that we generated. So this is how it looks like, the whole equation. And this is a parameter correlation matrix. Mostly the parameters are not correlated, although few parameters, some parameters could be correlated, but this is what we got. And the fit between the methane production predicted by our detailed model and that predicted by our simplified model, the correlation is pretty good. So this is the equation that we developed for methane generation in the gravity sewer. We applied a very similar approach for rising main or pressure main. Only difference here is then we need to take into account the pump runtime, pump capacity, etc. That adds extra inputs to our model. Again, based on the fundamental, if the pipe is running all the time, then we could have a very simple equation. The rate of methane production per unit length is proportional to diameter of the pipe. And then taking into account the pump operations, the intervals and the pump running time, etc., then we could have a nonlinear relationship shown here. So the variables here: diameter of the pipe, number of pump runs per day, and then pump run time over a day. So based on those inputs, we can always calculate the methane generation rate. And then there are corrections for the temperature, the standard correction for biological reactions, etc. And then how do we apply this model? It's basically, we always have got this database of pipe length, diameter, and then we can have the daily average flow rates, number of pump events per day, pump interval time, etc. Based on that, we can use that equation to calculate methane production for each of these pipes. This is an example for rising main sewer system. And then we can add all the production rates of production in each of these pipes to calculate total production. So in this particular case, there were 11 different pipe sections, and we got the total methane production as 17.95 kilogram per day. And we had a measurement carried out in that same sewer system. At the end of the system, we measured diesel methane over a certain period. And then there were 2 campaigns carried out, one during summer, one during winter. We calculated the production based on our simplified model for both the cases. And here is the comparison here. So the difference we got in one case is minus 23.5%, another case minus 0.73%. Again, this is not perfect, but this gives you with some confidence that the simplified model can actually predict real methane production and hence the emission from a sewer system. The whole assumption in this exercise is whatever is produced in sewer pipe is emitted to atmosphere ultimately. There's one assumption. Second assumption that has got some basis is the aerobic oxidation of methane is completely neglected. We have some modeling proof that this is what happens in sewer system. Okay, this is what I wanted to present in this webinar. Thank you very much for your attendance. Thanks.
Thanks, Keshab. There is one question in the Q&A about the sewer modeling part. Yeah, so I think because this is relatively independent about the rest of the N2O talk, so just I'm wondering if you want to answer it now. Otherwise, if we have to wait until
I'll try to write the answer if I can, and then we can wait until our QA session later. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Okay, so maybe we move to the next speaker. So after we talk about the methane generation in the source, so the rest 4 speakers, we will start to talk about the nitrous oxide emission, which is a big chunk contributed to the majority of the fugitive greenhouse gas of the treatment plant. So our second speaker is Professor Mathieu Sperandio. So Mathieu is a professor at the National Institute for Applied Science of Toulouse in France, and is also the deputy director of Toulouse Biotechnology Institute. So he's also the member of management committee of IWA on nutrient removal and recovery. So Mathieu has supervised the 30+ PhD student and authored 85 scientific publications, has a lot of experience in N2O emissions in terms of quantification modeling from the biological wastewater treatment plant. So today, Mathieu will be talking about the state of the art of the N2O modeling based on the kinetic pathway models, and also the full-scale application in nitrifying biofilm reactors. I'll leave it to you, Mathieu.
Okay, thank you very much, I hope you can hear me. Yeah, so I present briefly kind of state of the art regarding the N2O emission models, and then I will give you an overview of what we are doing on modeling of full-scale nitrifying biofilm reactor in France. So first, I need to remind that most of the model related to N2O emissions has been reviewed in that book from the IWA group on GHG emissions. And chapter 7 contains that comparison that we did regarding the existing models and the different pathways that we need to consider for describing N2O emissions in that models. Well, basically, N2O is produced mainly by nitrification and denitrification with different pathways. And generally, the chemical pathways, which are also existing, are considered to be less important in our biological systems. So we focus most of our models on nitrifying and denitrifying pathways. Concerning denitrification, nitrogen is reduced into 4 steps, as introduced by Audenaert and Grady in 2008. Basically, nitrate are reduced into nitrite, then into nitric oxide into N2O, nitrous oxide, and then nitrous oxide into the nitrogen gas. So basically, N2O can be either produced or consumed by heterotroph in our systems. Regarding the nitrification steps, there is now a kind of consensus on the fact that we need to consider 2 pathways. The first one is relative to the oxidation, an incomplete oxidation of hydroxylamine, which is written as NN pathway. And the second pathway is the denitrification of the nitrite into NO and N2O, which is also called the nitrifier denitrification pathway. Well, basically, we use such models like similarly to activated sludge model concept, in the sense that we coupled oxidation and reductions reactions, which are pulled in single rate, which means that they are pulled considering the stoichiometry and the number of electrons which are consumed and released by each reactions. Basically, in the model we use, pocket model and the model of Audenaert and Grady, and especially for nitrification, the hydroxylamine for nitrification is considered as the main electron donors for both the 2 pathways, which are the reduction of nitrite or the incomplete oxidation of hydroxylamine, which is linked to NO reduction. Well, now if I give you an example of what we can do with such model, I propose to explain the actual works that we do with our partners in Paris, the SIAP, which is the Paris utilities, and with INRAE group in the framework of MOCOPE program. So basically in our metropole in France, we have nitrifying biofilm reactors, which are used because they can be operated at quite high load, close to 1 kilogram of nitrogen per cubic meter per day. And these systems were monitored to know how much N2O they produced during different campaigns. And basically what the campaign said that Senegal, for example, the N2 emissions were close to 2% up to 4% of the nitrogen removed, which are quite high levels. And if you compare to the global carbon footprint of the plant, it's more than 80% of that carbon footprint, which comes from that direct N2 emissions. So it's important to mitigate, to understand that N2 emissions and to mitigate them. And what we did was start 5 years ago, and we start to develop a N2O model for this type of systems by adapting an existing model. It was the topic of Justin Fiat, PhD, and then we moved to a program regarding the mitigation of the N2O. So my first message on that models, that simulation work, is the fact that it's important to point out the importance of description of the physical aspect on that biofilters. So in this system, the biofilm is supported by polystyrene carriers, and the system is fed by wastewater from the bottom on these systems, and it is continuously aerated, except during the backwash of the system. The model was developed on MATLAB Simulink, in which we consider the biofilters with a series of reactors for both the gas, the liquid, and the biofilm system. It is really important to consider the variation of the gas phase properties in that system, because the N2O concentration can vary on the system, on the different part of the reactor. And it was demonstrated by Justin that it was really important to consider the variation of N2O concentration and also pressure, and also the quality of the gas hold-up prediction was really important to obtain a good repartition between the N2O in the liquid phase and the N2O in the gas phase. Well, after that, the model was calibrated on 2 different campaigns. Measurements were obtained during summer and winter, and basically the emissions were more important in winter compared to summer. And the So calibration was divided in different steps. The first step was dedicated to physical aspects, to be able to describe correctly the N2O repartition between the liquid and gas phase. Then some parameters were adapted to predict the global nitrogen forms like ammonia, nitrate, and nitrate. It was basically the affinity constant for oxygen, which were really sensitive at that step. And for the last step, the N2O production and emission mechanisms were calibrated. The most sensitive parameter at that stage was the ND reduction factor, and also, again, the oxygen affinity constant for AOBs. Basically, at the end of such calibration, the predictions were quite good in winter and summer. And also, we obtained a good description of the N2O dissolved in the liquid phase, which is also something important, as you will see. Well, if we have a look on the data on that plant, with statistics, we obtain the reason for the variability. And you can see on this graph with principal component analysis that the main source of variability are related to rain events, modifying the flow and diluting the effluent, and also the seasons because of temperature variation, and also because of the variation of the population in the city. At the end, we can see that the N2 emission factor are correlated to NH4 concentration, the two seasons, and also the N2 emission rates is correlated to the ammonia load, which is quite logical. And also the emission factor was inversely correlated to the rate and to the flow of dissolved N2O during winter. Well, basically, if we use the model to understand what happens when the systems reach a high load, you can see on this graph that the highest emissions in terms of emission factor were observed when the load was higher than 1 kilogram of nitrogen per cubic meter per day. And during such period, what we observe in the biofilm is the fact that you accumulate hydroxylamine at such load. And at the same time, dissolved oxygen is quite low, which means that most of the electrons from hydroxylamine are used to reduce NO into N2O. And also what you observe is that at low temperature during winter, the emissions are slightly higher. And what the model indicates is that N2O emissions are also related to the heterotroph denitrification in that biofilm system. And this reduction of N2O due to heterotroph decrease at low temperature. Well, basically that nitrifying biological filters are used in a train of process, you can see, with pretreatments and also with pre-denitrification or post-denitrification, depending on the design. So we try to compare different control scenarios and strategies. First, we focus on the QR regulation. What we can expect is to limit the N2O stripping and limiting also DO limitation, which can make more N2O production. Then we compare feedback or feed-forward strategies using the ammonium measurement on the system. And also we consider the recirculation control, basically both internal recirculation or pre-denitrification recirculation can be used using, again, ammonia measurement, but also direct and online N2O measurement in as the N2O set point. Well, basically what we conclude is that with airflow control, it was quite difficult to see a difference between the different typologies like feedback or feed forward. And basically what we observe is that the N2O emission factor was inversely correlated to the ammonia set point. So which means that if you want to increase the performance by decreasing the ammonia set point in the outlet, you increase the emission factor, which is also a link that we observe with the nitrogen load. More interesting was the use of recirculation flow, because as you can see, when we use this recirculation with different recirculation ratio, we observe that N2 emission can be quite reduced up to 60% reduction for recirculation ratio of 200%. And this is basically due to the dilution of the influent for a given part. But if you increase the flow to more than 100%, then you use the capacity of denitrification to reduce the N2O produced by nitrification, which means that the dissolved N2O is important to predict because you can reduce some kind of N2O in the pre-denitrification system. So my conclusions now, N2O models reach the age of maturity, so they still need to be improved in such aspect, but I think they are now quite useful for identifying influencing factors and possible strategies for mitigation. Obviously, it's important to have an appropriate calibration first. And my message also is that a major challenge in full-scale system is to describe correctly the heterogeneities by using different model for describing the hydraulics and the hydrodynamics of such systems. Okay, thank you very much. And thank you again to all my colleagues from SIAP, INRAE, and INSA for this work.
Thank you very much, Matthew. It's very interesting to see the application of the full-scale model in this full-scale biofilm system. So I think there's a question in the Q&A, so you can see if you want to answer it in written. Otherwise, we can leave it at the end in Q&A. I also have some questions to you as well. I will leave it to the Q&A session. I think I'll move to the next speaker. So our next speaker is Dr. Wim Audenaert. So Wim holds a PhD and Master of Science degree in Environmental Engineering, and he's also co-founder and CEO at AMT. So AMT is the company that helps utility consultants and technology developers reducing and omitting on-site the piloting efficiency, obtaining optimal process design operation. So their key solutions include a unique CFD combined with kinetic model for biological and chemical treatment processes. So I think I'll leave the time to Wim talk about their CFD combined with kinetic model to reduce the N2O emissions.
Thank you very much, Leo, for the introduction. So yeah, hi everyone, I'm Wim Audenaert. Pleasure to be here in this webinar. Thanks for Mia setting it up, and thanks for the participants of being here. I think this presentation nicely connects to the story Mathieu just said. And I especially like the last comment on his last slide, which was, it is quite challenging to account for the heterogeneities in a reactor. So there are quite some gradients. So it nicely connects because thanks for introducing all the kinetics, Mathieu. And I will now build further on that, looking in 3D. So we will bring in the spatial components. Yeah. So this presentation was put together in collaboration with my whole team and of course all the customers we currently work with. So when we look at N2O mission, in fact, it is quite a complex process. Huh? I think everybody understands this. Not only conducting measurement campaigns or getting them right is complex, but actually how everything works behind the scenes within a bioreactor is quite a challenge. So the first step is actually the production. Just imagine we would have no biological production of N2O. We would have actually no greenhouse gas emissions from N2O. So this is really where it all starts. It gets produced, and we already saw a couple of speakers introducing the pathways. There are actually three main pathways, one by the heterotrophs, yeah, and then two pathways, the hydroxylamine and the other pathway by the autotrophs. So these are the nitrifiers. So yeah, these bacteria are actually the root cause. Huh? They are doing certain things well because they help us treating wastewater, but unfortunately, they also produce N2O. And then, of course, once your N2O gets produced in the liquid phase, it gets transported in your bioreactor through the water flow. Yeah, so that is really the transport and diffusion of your N2O, and in the end, it gets emitted, and that is really causing the greenhouse gas emissions. Yeah, so this is really the three very different steps. And the complexity a bit with measurements is that what you measure is related to steps 2 and 3. So if you do gas measurements, you actually directly measure the emissions in a certain zone. But as you can see on this CFD image, it can be quite heterogeneous. a difficult word, sorry, in a bioreactor. So it can be quite some variation on data. Yeah, and if your influence changes, these zones can also shift. Same here with liquids. If you look at it, yeah, it can be quite a change happening in your system caused by local dissolved oxygen, local ammonia being somewhere. So actually what we measure is the result of the root cause. Yeah. So in the end, what has a climate impact is of course the emissions. So you can actually treat the gas as well. Some utilities are looking into this, but really to solve the issue, probably we have to really look at the root causes. And this is really the biological kinetics locally somewhere in your bioreactor. So this is a webinar on modeling, and I tried to summarize a bit the benefits of models in the N2O question here at the challenge. Well, utilities are mainly in the assessment stage right now. Many of them want to quantify their emissions, and models can be used to help quantifying the emissions in a dynamic context. They can also help you comparing different plants or prioritize them. And of course, they can also enhance, reduce, or replace on-site measurements. Because this is really, the question is this really feasible for many utilities to go that deep in measurements? Then, of course, we have the mitigation stage, and we saw a couple of examples already. You can virtually test mitigation strategies. Then you can do a comparative analysis. And then you can also try to optimize the effluent quality, because we should not forget, for example, in Europe, we will have very stringent effluent limits coming with the new framework directive, and especially 2027 is a key moment. So utilities might want to mitigate N2O, but only under the condition that they don't lose or even improve effluent quality. And this is really, really a challenge that should not be underestimated. In the end, models probably can also help to really develop the generic learnings every utility can apply, because this is currently a bit lacking. So when you look at the tool we have been developing, it is a combination of a CFD model, which is a computational fluid dynamics model. It's a 3D simulation of the flow in a bioreactor, and we combine it with the biokinetics. So it has a physical part in it. So this means the transport of your N2O, the fusion stripping, it's all included there. And then, of course, it has the biological part in it, which are the different pathways of N2O. And the core of the biological model is really the ASM models, the activated sludge models, which we have heard about in this webinar before. So in the end, you get plots like these top views or 3D views of your local N2O or local dissolved oxygen and things like that, yeah, in the gas and the liquid stage. So when we look at some case examples, how do you now apply this and how do we use that now in certain projects? Well, this is the first case in New Zealand in collaboration with Watercare. Well, they have a specific pilot over there next to their full-scale plant to really get more understanding on N2O, because their goal is really to mitigate it and to mitigate through process understanding. So you can see you have a very simple setup here, an anoxic zone, return activated sludge inlet coming in. So high COD, of course, here, high ammonia, it's all coming in. And then here you have your aeration. So your flow goes like this and then goes to the aeration. And they are typically measuring with some sensors, either gas hoods or liquid measurements. So if you simulate that with that combined model, you can actually visualize your liquid N2O concentration. For example, you can see it's way higher in the anoxic zone in this case compared to the aerobic zone. But you can also see, if you look at the gas, that's a bit the opposite, because the stripping really, really happens in this case, mainly in the aerobic zone. So if you would measure with a hood, you would measure, of course, your N2O here. If you would measure with a hood here, you would measure some emission, but especially the liquid measurements would be higher in the anoxic zone. Yeah, but this is just a very simple case example illustrating what happens. But what these measurements would not tell us is what is really the root cause? What is causing the N2O production in this case? And that's why we look one level deeper now. So we are looking from the side now in this reactor. So this is a side view. Yeah, you see the anoxic compartment here and the aerobic zone here. And what we visualize right now is not the concentrations of N2O, but the production rate. So kilograms per cubic meters or per liter per second. So this is the local production rate by 3 different pathways, heterotrophs and the 2 pathways by the autotrophs. And what you can see is that most of the reactors, dark blue, there is almost no production. But the production of N2O really happens in a very little volume proportionally in your reactor. So the heterotrophs, of course, mainly do it here when there is a feed, when there is high ammonia. And the autotrophs do it mainly because in this case, you have a local recirculation of some oxygen. So these two pathways are actually activated here. And then if you would do a scenario, for example, you increase your ammonia, which often happens, you see things shifting, not so much for the heterotrophs, but the impact on the production of the autotrophs, this pattern is now quite different. Why? Because of course the ammonia gets deeper into the aerobic zone now. Yeah. So this is just to illustrate that the root causes, let's say Pareto principle kind of applies. Maybe 80% of your N2O emissions are caused by 20% of your reactor volume. And it's all about having understanding on these tiny volumes and maybe managing them. So here you can see the same plots, but quantitatively compared how these pathways contribute to the overall N2O emission. So these three pathways, and you can see in scenario 1, so the low ammonia scenario, the heterotrophs were doing most of the production, while actually in the second one, it is really the autotrophs. Yeah, that's almost 80%, more than 80%. So now we go to a full-scale plant in Canada. This is a Canadian reactor. Again, we will not go too much into detail because it's quite complex. But what I'm showing here is 6 different scenarios. Yeah. So this is the top view of the real reactor, anoxic zone, anaerobic, anoxic, and then you have an aerated zone with fine bubble diffusion. Yeah. Some recycles, things like that. The flow goes like this. And here we see the same reactor and we visualize, in this case, the liquid N2O concentration. So just imagine you would measure somewhere with sensors. This is actually, if you would move your sensor, this is what you would measure in terms of gradients. There's quite some difference across the scenarios. That what you can already observe. The intensity of the local N2O concentration is quite different. For example, if you compare the extreme scenario 3 with the base case scenario, what happened here is they switched on the winter package. This is kind of a swing zone they use to catch ammonia peaks in the winter. It actually leads to a drastic reduction in N2O, but it also leads, of course, to higher nitrates because you lose a bit of your denitrification capacity. So this is quite extreme, as you can see. But if you would measure with sensors, it would be quite tricky, the image you would get here. Another important thing is if you look at scenario 5, in this case, I think it's a winter scenario combined with an elevated sludge concentration and a somewhat lower aeration. You can see that suddenly you get also a liquid N2O production at the effluent here suddenly, which is not the case in the other scenarios. Yeah, so this is what you can nicely visualize. If you look at the gas, this is the same scenarios, but for the gas. So this is really the stripping at the surface of the reactor. So now if you would measure with a hood, this is what you would measure. And again, the patterns are quite different if you compare these different scenarios. So of course, if you're a wastewater practitioner, everybody understands there are huge dynamics, and also so these intensities or these zones literally shift across the reactor as function of how the year progresses, how your operation is done. Just to quantitatively come back to these two scenarios, these extremes, so the one with the swing zone on and the one without the swing zone on, it led to a 50% reduction of emissions almost, and well, 46, let's say, of the emissions in the gas phase, and then 50% of the production reduction. Yeah, we kind of distinguish because you can also lose some N2O in the effluent. That's what you can see here. This reduction was also significant. Yeah, 50% or so. So in the end, the net balance of your N2O is it's some goes to the gas, gets stripped, some goes to your effluent sometimes. Yeah, which is not often taken into account. So now we are also with this customer guiding him with the measurement campaigns because they are planning a lot of measurements. And then we use such simulations to guide a bit. If you would do liquid sensoring, where would you put them to get the most accurate view of your emissions? Because you don't want overestimation, but also you don't want underestimation. And the same for the gas hoods, depending a bit on how many hoods they would use, 1 or 2, or 1, 2, 3 sensors. This is how we now help guiding a bit the measurement campaigns. So this brings us to the conclusions of this slideshow. So we believe that the Pareto principle kind of applies to N2O. 80% of your N2O might be produced in only 20% of, or even less of your bioreactor volume. So it's about understanding the production volumes. And we believe also that N2O measurements reveal symptoms. So they really give you an idea on how bad it can be or what can be the variation. But really to cure the patient, we believe you really need to address the root causes. And to stay in the healthcare jargon, our solution acts kind of like an X-ray. So you have kind of a 3D diagnosis of reactor. But of course, it's more than X-ray, because with the what-if testing of these models, you can then virtually test mitigation strategies. So we currently have customers that are now going to try to use the models for regulatory reporting even, and try to limit the measurements as much as possible, because the models allow testing flexibility. Okay, that was my presentation. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thanks, Wim. Thanks for the nice presentation to show us how to use CFD combined with kinetic models to do X-ray about the N2O generation. So I guess we'll leave questions for discussion at the Q&A session. Thanks for that. So before I introduce the next speaker, I'd like to remind all of you that these slides, we will make it available hopefully by tomorrow or Wednesday. So for all the audience who has registered on these webinars, that you will be able to get a copy of the slides as well. Okay, so for our next presenter is Dr. Xavier Flores Alsina. So Xavier holds a senior researcher position at the Process System Engineering of the Technical University of Denmark. So he did his PhD between the University of Girona in Spain and also the University of Oxford in the UK. He also gained a lot of postdoc experience in many different countries like Canada, Sweden, Australia, South Africa. So his main field on the experience of mathematical modeling, data science, process control, and also AI related modeling applied to water system. So today, Xavier will be sharing his experience in benchmark modeling about the greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, I'll leave it to you, Xavier.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, fantastic. So good morning, everybody. My name is Xavier Flores Alsina. I'm a senior researcher at the Department of Chemical and Biochemical Engineering at DTU. In the next 10 minutes, I'm going to talk about benchmarking greenhouse gas emissions in water treatment systems, past, present, and also like future perspectives. Before starting my presentation, I would like to give some background information. So the whole BSM development has been an ongoing effort since 1997. First started as a EU cost action, then later developed into an International Water Association task group. The task group was called Benchmarking of Control Strategies for Wastewater Treatment Plants and started in 2005. The following years, the task group developed different prototypes, the BSM-1, the BSM-2, but also like other models like the influence generator or solvers to make, for example, computational efficient models like the ADM-1 a reality. All this knowledge was summarized into a scientific and technical report that was published in 2014 and now is open access. So the objective of the BSM task group was to provide a realistic framework to compare both control and monitoring strategies for wastewater treatment plants. So basically, somebody comes up with a controller, and then the framework provides influence disturbances, a plan layout, simulation procedure, models, evaluation criteria to compare how efficient is this controller compared to other systems that can be found in the literature or a baseline scenario that is available. So the result of the task group were different implementations, for example, the BSM-1, which included activated large reactor and a secondary settler. The BSM-1LT that it's like the BSM1, but basically the evaluation procedure was extended from 14 days to 1 year. We included temperature corrections, also like the effects of toxics and inhibitory compounds, and the BSM2, which basically combine both water and sludge line. We are strongly believers that sharing is caring. So basically we made all the models available online for people to download them. So if you go to the GitHub account of DTU and Loon, so you can find all the different models, and then with lots of information about how to run these models and how to reproduce the results. And then also links to the publications in case there is a publication. About the past, how did we include greenhouse gas emissions within the BSM platform? So the first thing that we did back when I was in Canada with the group in Laval, so we changed the mathematical models. And the ASM1 was the core model, so we had to extend it, and then we put a 2-step nitrification and 4-step denitrification, for example, and then different N2O pathway, for example, OHO denitrification and AOV denitrification. When it comes to the sludge lines, so we didn't change the main model, which was the ADM1, but the thing that we changed were the interfaces between the two models. When it came to the evaluation criteria, so we had the effluent quality index that basically gives an idea of the pollution load leaving the plant. The operational cost index that summarize the different costs that you can have, for example, aeration, mixing, sludge production, for example, chemical, and also like the credit that derives from methane production, for example, electricity and heat. And we define what we call a greenhouse gas emission index. And this greenhouse gas emission index involved the 5 different categories. The first was direct secondary treatment emissions. And these emissions basically involved CO2 from respiration, for example. Also N2O production from both nitrification and denitrification processes, and CO2 or the CO2 credit from nitrifiers, because AOVs use CO2 as carbon source. The second category was sludge processing, and then we account for CO2 and methane that is produced during anaerobic digester. And then the third category were more off-site emissions, for example, those emissions that are related from energy consumption, for example, aeration and mixing. Also, the fourth category are emissions derived from chemicals, for example, like for process intensification, like ethanol. And the fifth category was emissions for sludge disposal and reuse. The plan layout, the influent disturbances, and the simulation procedure remain the same. So these are the simulations results that we obtained when we implemented in the BSM2 3 types of control strategies. The first strategy was to modify the dissolved oxygen set point in the activated sludge reactor. The second type of strategy was to modify the percentage of TSS removal in the primary clarifier. And the third category was to change the temperature in the anaerobic digester. So move from mesophilic to thermophilic conditions. And then at the beginning, so we used just 2 indexes to quantify how efficient were these controllers: the effluent quality index and the operational cost index. So one of the things that we could see is that, for example, higher DO set points improve effluent quality because, of course, we had better nitrification efficiencies, but of course, increased the cost. So it has more like aeration, so it was more expensive to operate. The second was to change the efficiency of the primary clarifier. And then, of course, we had more revenues derived from methane production in the plant because more COD was sent to the sludge line instead of being burned into the aerobic reactor. But of course, I mean, this changed the COD nitrogen ratios and end up damaging denitrification processes. And the third category was when we changed the temperature in the anaerobic digester from mesophilic to thermophilic conditions. Basically, we didn't see that much effect. Just, it was more expensive to operate because the methane was already well optimized. So this was using traditional criteria. So what would happen, what is going to happen, when we include like this third dimension that was greenhouse gas emissions. And these greenhouse emissions were quantified as kilograms of CO2 equivalents per day. So we can have, or we could see these three-dimensional representations where we could compare cost, effluent quality, and emissions. And then we could see like synergies and trade-offs between, for example, when implementing certain controllers. So this is a specific example, is when you decrease the dissolved oxygen set point in the activated large reactor. So of course you decrease the cost of the operational cost index. When it comes to emissions, you decrease the offsite CO2 emissions, but increases the N2O production. And since N2O has this dramatic effect, because it has this 300 stronger effect than CO2, it affects a lot your whole greenhouse gas emission index. So that's why you have this outlier in this representation. About the present, so this implementation has been recently upgraded to account for greenhouse gas emissions in nutrient recovery options. This work was led by the guys from University of Autonomous Barcelona, and both DTU and LUT were collaborating with it. The work expanded the scope, so we modified the influent disturbances. So we include phosphorus, for example, and full cationic and anionic description. Also, we modified the plant layout. So we moved from an MLE configuration to an A2O configuration. So we had to add 2 anaerobic reactors to promote the growth of PAOs. Also, we modified the mathematical models. So the core model in the first implementation was ASM1, and this one is ASM3. And then, of course, we modified the model interfaces to ensure that we had continuity between like the sludge line and the water line. We modified the evaluation criteria to include all these different elements. And then we expanded the scope of controllers. So we include controller strategies, but also like potential recovery strategies. So with this new platform, we could have these very nice representations where we have a mapping of the different elements coming to the plant, for example, how much carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus, for example, and then what is the fate and the transformation of these elements. So for example, what happens with CO2, how much of the CO2 is transformed into carbon is transformed into CO2 or methane, for example, how much of this carbon ends up in the effluent, or how much of this carbon ends into the sludge, for example. The same for nitrogen. So how much of this nitrogen is nitrified and denitrified, and how much of this nitrogen ends up in the effluent or in the sludge as part of the biosolids. More information, for example, these are very nice representations, for example, what is going to happen when you increase the degree of complexity when operating the plant. So A0 is the plant running in a baseline mode, and then A1, A2, A3, and 4, and 5, so are different controllers, for example, ammonia controllers, or adding of different chemicals, or for example, including like potential recovery, like with estrogide. And then we could see, for example, how changes the effluent quality index and how much changes the operational cost index, the N2O emissions, for example, or the whole quantity of greenhouse gas emissions. Future. So what we are going to do now is try to use these models that we developed in the past for a new project that has been recently granted by the Danish MUDP. And this is going to be quite relevant in Denmark because I think it's going to be one of the first countries where N2O is going to be taxed. So for example, like water utilities will have to take a closer look to N2O emissions in both treatment, reduction, for example, of these emissions or potential treatment. And this is exactly what we're going to do in this project. So is it possible to treat these emissions, and how much is it going to cost us? So in the consortium, we have 3 utilities, the company providing the catalyzer, consultants, and also DTU doing some part of the research. And this schematics represents quite nice, what is going to happen. So we have the wastewater treatment plan, and then it's going to be a team of modelers creating these virtual representations with the models that we have developed in the past. And then, of course, we're going to use these models to run scenarios where we take into account this kind of multi-objective nature of the problem, including effluent quality, cost, and greenhouse gas emissions, for example. This is a more like accurate representation of what is going to happen. So some of these tools are going to be used for mass balancing and data reconciliation, for example. We're going to quantify these emissions, and then with these computer models, so we will develop simulation tools and then run a scenario analysis. And then that is going to be quite interesting what's going to happen, because we could answer questions such as, I can operate the plant in a certain way that I can produce, for example, more N2O, but perhaps I can treat it. And then how much is going to treat it? How much is going to cost treating this N2O? And then how these different criteria correlate to each other, effluent quality, cost of treatment, cost of operation, N2O emissions, etc. A bit of conclusions and take-home messages. So the addition of greenhouse gas emissions, I think it's a very interesting add-on, because it gives a better informed decision about the sustainability of certain operational strategies or controllers in wastewater treatment plants. One of the things that we saw when we ran these exercises and simulations is the risk of energy-related optimization, for example, when you try to operate the plant in a way that it runs in a low energy consumption, for example, that could lead to a massive increase on N2O, and then this has a dramatic effect on your whole index, or the whole greenhouse gas index in the plant. I think it's also very important to consider both waterline and sludge line, otherwise you have a part or an incomplete picture of what is happening, because of course, a nice example was, for example, when you change the efficiency of the primary clarifier. So you have effects in different ways, for example, in both the activated sludge reactor, but also in the anaerobic digester. And since some of these observations and tools are very specific, we developed these tools in order to make them general. So we put them online, people can download them, and of course, adapt them to the specific problems. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will be happy to answer questions at the end of the seminar.
Thanks, Xavier. It's really interesting and nice to see how the benchmark modeling provided an integrated assessment tool that not only consider about N2O emissions, but also consider about the energy, the cost associated as well. So I think there are two questions already asked in the Q&A. You can have a look to see if you can answer them live. Otherwise, we can leave it to the Q&A. Thanks. All right. I think we now move to the last speaker for this modeling session. Dr. Jose Porro. So Jose is also a lead editor for this book as well. So he's a founder and CEO of Wastewater Global, and also what is climate technical startups helping the decarbonization for the water industry. So he has the background in environmental engineering, and he's also expert in wastewater N2O process emissions modeling, and also try to integrate it with AI and machine learning tool in the N2O modeling. So Jose is also the previous chair of the IWA task group on the GHG modeling. So I will leave the next time to Jose.
Thank you, Leo. And thank you all and Yanelsi for organizing this and having us present here. And it's actually not doctor yet, yeah, soon. But what I wanted to present today was using an AI and machine learning approach for accounting of reducing and monitoring wastewater N2O process emissions. And what we'll be doing is showing a quick glimpse of what the N2O reduction journey looks like, which starts with first accounting of the N2O emissions to be able to screen and prioritize sites where we want to start taking action with N2O, measuring and reducing N2O, and then monitoring the process and the N2O emissions after reducing your N2O. But first, before showing the different parts of this journey, I wanted to make sure that it was clear what we're talking about when we say AI and machine learning and what's behind exactly the approach. So I'll pull up the, sorry, 1 second, just need to get rid of this toolbar. So showing the pathways again, but what's important here is that not necessarily understanding what's happening at a metabolic level, because this is where the N2O production is happening, but what's happening on an operational level, because this is what impacts what happens at the metabolic level. So there are different operating conditions, and we can call these root causes or influencing factors or risk factors. But the important thing is that they tell us why we have N2O emissions. And there can be several combinations that lead to N2O production, combinations of operating conditions that lead to N2O production and emission. But what's important is that we have a framework to be able to look at any operating condition, any process conditions, and be able to say why there's N2O and what we can do to reduce it. So we've built this framework. So because all of these operating conditions and process conditions have been directly linked to risk of N2O emissions in the literature, we took a look at what has been reported through full-scale and lab-scale experiments for the various influencing factors, then used a knowledge-based approach to be able to dynamically generate a risk score that tells us why we have emissions, what we can do to reduce them. And then we can also use machine learning to predict what these N2O emissions are. And what is interesting is that we're combining a knowledge-based approach with machine learning, which is a data-driven approach. And what the knowledge-based does is kind of removes the black box around the machine learning, because if we see N2O emissions going up, we know why, and we know what we need to do to bring them back down. So this is what we're essentially implementing in our N2O risk decision support platform. So we start using this approach to first start accounting of the N2O emissions and being able to screen and prioritize sites. And the problem with these emission factors that are currently used and are widely accepted for accounting of N2O emissions is that they don't account for the site-specific conditions. They don't account for what's happening in the reactors. And if we use machine learning, it does allow us to do this. And here we're showing how we've used a machine learning model trained with data from a completely different site to estimate the N2O emissions for another site. And we can see that it comes much closer than what the IPCC emission factors are able to do. So knowing this, we've been able to start implementing this and taking a look at a large wastewater treatment plant in Northeast Illinois here in the US. And we're able to take into account the site-specific and the process conditions to be able to look at the risk profile for a whole year, and then also be able to take a look at what the N2O emissions are for that year. And so for any given reactor or lane, we can calculate what the N2O emissions are. So we're able to do this for each pass in the lane, and we can see how the risk profile can change, and also the N2O emissions can change. So it's important that you're looking at each part of the plant to be able to calculate what the total emissions are. And once you've been able to do this, and you've been able to do this for several sites, then you can start to see where you need to be prioritizing action. In terms of measuring and reducing N2O, we first want to start measuring in and it's not just as simple as getting these N2O results. You first have to decide on which method you want to be using, whether it's a hood method or using the sensors to measure in the liquid, then combining process knowledge and N2O knowledge to know where you want to be measuring, and then verifying any differences there might be in the different reference spots where you want to be measuring. But once you've been able to get a month of measurements, you can train a machine learning model. And then once you've done that, you can actually take a look at the historical data, because we know that there might be seasonal variation. We know that there might be changes in operation that might cause differences in the N2O emissions profile. We don't have to measure for a whole year to see this change. We can use a trained machine learning model and then be able to look at the historical data. And we've tested this approach, and what we wanted to see always is that the machine learning model is capturing the dynamics properly. Sometimes it's not perfect. It doesn't quite get some of these peaks all the way, but these are very short periods of time. So as long as it's mainly getting it for the whole period, and it is actually capturing these dynamics, then we know we can have confidence in this model. Because if we were seeing that it's predicting peaks at different times and it's just coincidentally calculating the same emissions, then we know that the model is not actually correct. But we can see that we are able to calculate very accurate emissions using this approach, 292 versus 289, which for our purposes is more than enough. So once we've been measuring, we can also take a look at the risk, and we can verify that the N2O is happening when we are predicting risk. And in this particular case, it was due to risk of both low DO conditions, which is this blue, but also a risk of high DO conditions, which is this red here. So looking at this, we can propose control actions, and we can see what the recommended DO would have been before and after. And once they're implementing changes, the idea is to adjust, fine tune the control, not change the control, but fine tune it so that they can be closer to this blue line. So they were able to make those adjustments and bring the DO closer to the blue line, and we can see the direct impact that has on the N2O. So in this particular case, we saw a reduction close to 90%, but we've also in other sites in the Netherlands and the UK have been seeing reductions of 90%, 80% of the N2O. So once you've reduced the N2O, you're not done. You want to be now monitoring the process, because we know those reductions can easily go away if things start to change and as seasonal variations occur. So just like we're able to use a trained model to look at the historical data, we can use it to start to look forward. And we've seen that in some cases we can get close to up to 5 months with fairly good accuracy with the machine learning model, but this can change from site to site. And the idea is that there's actually 1 or 2 times during the year that you'd want to go back to verify the accuracy of the model. And if it's gone out of range, this is where it can be retrained to bring it back in line. The other thing that we can do, because at this point we have a library of over 50 machine learning models, we can look at the process conditions and say that another model might be better based on the current process conditions, and we can replace it until measurements can be done to retrain the model. But we're also looking at using the machine learning models to look in the parallel lanes. So we're not just looking at one lane, because we know that there can be significant differences from one lane to another. So this is important when monitoring the process and making sure that the N2O isn't coming back up. And if it is, making sure that you're making the adjustments to bring it back down. But what's also interesting is we can integrate these insights, these AI and machine learning insights, with other tools like the ASM mechanistic models or process models, because then we can predict what the N2O emissions are just using like ASM1 state variables. And then based on the recommended control actions, we can test them using the process models. The CFD biokinetic models that which Wim showed, we've been able to integrate our AI machine learning insights with this. I think we presented this in Water Matrix in 2019. So it's an interesting application of the AI machine learning approach. But we can also implement these insights in any digital twin context, and also implement it in various advanced control solution platforms. So the N2O journey, reduction journey can start now. We've seen how we can reduce N2O, and there's really no reason to wait at this point. There's definitely plenty that can be done. And we see that AI and machine learning can help take you through this journey. Thank you.
Thanks, Jose. Okay, I think now all the speakers have finished their presentation. So I think there are some questions that have been answered already in the Q&A, but there is some questions actually haven't. We still got a few more minutes, which we can have some general discussions. Probably I think there's one question. I'm not sure if all of you have seen that. This is probably a good one to start with the general discussion. So the question is, what I've seen is that N2O models sometimes very case specific. So you see the limit of the broad application. I think that the question is like to seek comments or share opinions that did you see the future for any pure mechanistic model for full-scale application, or what did you see the future of the model? Probably we start from Keshab, because I know in the sewer, so we also started the sewer axis based on some like kinetic models, and then there is consideration, I guess, in the future to integrate some data-driven. So what do you say about the future for pure mechanistic model in the sewer system? And then we move to the rest of the panel members to share their opinion.
For sewers, I'm not sure if the mechanistic models are the way to go, because of the nature of the system itself, because it's pretty large, and if you look for the accurate data for whole sewer system, it's pretty difficult to get those data as well. So that basically limits the application of mechanistic models to sewer systems. And that's why we are moving from mechanistic models to more simplified models. Having said that, the mechanistic model can provide the basis for those simplified models as well. So that's the approach that we are taking now.
Yep, I see. Thanks. In terms of the N2O, maybe we can start with Matthew, that with the kinetic models, I think, what do you say? How did you say the future?
Well, but obviously N2O models are can be used at that stage for after calibration to predict things in full-scale systems. And I know that from Alem, that question comes from Alem Filali, and I know we have that discussion about the specificity of that model to each system. But my feeling is that deterministic model for N2O has now all the mechanisms involved which are included. The problem is more linked to calibration, which gives sometimes a tricky task when you don't have quality in your data. And you have seen with Wim a very nice application of that deterministic model. When you want to understand where does it come from, and from physical design, I think it's very useful to have such kind of deterministic model. But then if you have more information in your data, I'm quite convinced that the data-driven models can also give you very nice feature. And obviously the models are useful when the data are not enough to give the answers that you are looking for. My feeling.
I agree. Well, before I share my thoughts, I will say, are there any other panel members and want to share your thoughts? Because I think even with the benchmark modeling of CFD, we actually combine them with the kinetic models, right?
Yeah.
I guess I could. Sorry, go ahead, Wim.
Yeah, man. Okay, I'll keep it short. So, no, well, what we have seen indeed is that N2O is a very can be a very local phenomenon. So it means it can be really very subtle things within one specific plant that would cause some N2O or some patterns when you visualize it in 3D. It happens. So what we try to do is, if you look at the mechanistic models, then to avoid calibration of biological parameters to compensate for assuming too simplistic hydraulic behavior. So that is often done, that biological parameters need a tweaking, but actually the biology is fine, but you just do a tweaking to do data fitting because there is some information on the hydraulics not in your model. And we strongly believe in that combination of it.
Yeah. Jose, you got something to share?
Yeah, so I think a big challenge in the calibration of the mechanistic models is not only getting the physical correct, but also like the kinetics correct, because that can slightly that can be different from site to site. One big advantage of using the risk-based approach is that we don't have to calibrate that. So we can apply the same rules, the same knowledge for looking at any site and be able to confidently be able to say whether the risk is higher or the risk is lower. The machine learning part, each of those 50 or so machine learning models that we have in the library are in a way very site specific. So you kind of run into this, you can run it, whether it's a data driven or whether it's mechanistic model, you're going to run into the same issues in terms of being able to apply them to different sites. But what is nice is we can take a look at the process conditions and look for similar conditions to say, okay, here's where we, based on the process condition, the operating conditions, this is where we would anticipate similar kinetics, similar seasonal variation, and then make a selection that way. But it is a challenge. So I think it's a very good point that was made by Alan.
Xavier, you want to share any of your thoughts?
I think it's a compromise between both mechanistic and data-driven. I think it's mechanistic, or just a pure mechanistic model can be extremely difficult because of the complexity of the process itself. And perhaps, some of the processes can be approximated with a data-driven model, and then to have a more complete description of what is going on in the plant. I'm not in favor of a pure mechanistic or a pure data-driven. It's something in the middle, like something—
a hybrid.
A hybrid, exactly. A hybrid model, where you take bits and pieces of the best of each, discipline. And I think this is where you can find the balance.
Yeah, I agree. I feel we have already gained a lot of knowledge in this field, building these kinetic models. Based on what we have known, the future, we shouldn't fully sort of just abandon this and go to data-driven. I feel the hybrid somehow will play an important role in the future, and then to help us to learn the unknown knowledge that we don't know in the kinetic part, but also in the meantime help to simplify the calibration step that we required in the conventional kinetic modeling side. So that's my thoughts. But I agree. So the different models we can see this in the future. There's all sort of more to be done, to be studied. I think John Willis also comment something about the measurement in sewers. But we already 4 minutes beyond that. I think there are Another question, comment asked about the additional tax. I guess that's the carbon tax sort of apply for Denmark. Not sure any of you have that. Yeah, Xavier.
There is a lot of discussion going on, but it's nothing concrete or specific. I think in a couple of years, I mean, we are going to see, you know, how this carbon tax is going to be applied and how much, you know, utilities will have to pay for this. But in the meantime, there is an extremely hot topic in Denmark that basically makes, you know, sometimes water utilities very nervous. So they are looking into, for example, different ways of reducing, or, you know, in our case, we are considering even treating, you know, because it will depend. The feasibility of the treatment is going to depend of how much we will have to pay for these emissions and how much is going to cost us for treatment. So it's going to be a compromise with all these different elements. And then, of course, you know, models and digital tools and virtual tools are quite good for that purpose, because you can generate multiple scenarios, assuming multiple situations, and then see, for example, what can be feasible and what can be not.
Thanks. Well, I think we cannot take more questions. With the 2 questions in the Q&A left over is, I think, is more about the measurement, like what representative measurement we can get when we put a hood or put a sensor in that. Well, I guess that's another big topic that we need to discuss. But I guess after today's discussion, I hope that this webinar that gives you more sort of idea to see what has been done in the modeling field currently in the fugitive greenhouse gas area, and also hope some of these studies and talk did inspire you for the future work and studies that you have in mind. And of course, feel free to contact all the panel members if you got further questions and would like to clarify questions or get information. So as mentioned, we will be sharing the slides afterwards, and also this webinar will be available online, and you can watch back afterwards. So thanks again, I think, for all the panelist members who actually also the lead authors for the book. I really appreciate your time and contribution and hard work. And also they also lead a lot of co-authors in contributing to the book as well. In the end, thanks for MIA Group and ICA to give us this opportunity to organize this webinar. So thanks for all the audience.
Just one thing, Liu, before everybody disappears. Just a also with the finalization here. Just one more thing to mention before we disappear. Of course, I also want to say great thanks to all the presenters, but I also just want to mention one other thing, which is related to the next webinar that we will have. And that is to mention that we are organizing another MIA webinar already on December 21st. That will be in the afternoon, Central European time, 3 o'clock. And that will be on modeling of phototrophic systems. So we move away a little bit from the greenhouse gases here and see what we can do with algae and other types of phototrophic systems. And also, if those of you who attended the webinar, if you also feel that you have a topic that you would like to create a webinar about related to modeling, if you come to MIA, or to control, if you go to ICA, then just feel free to contact us, and we will try to make it happen. Because we are here for the benefits of our members and our viewers. But with that, were you finished, Louis? Or did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, that's it. I think there's a question in Q&A to see if all the answers and questions to the questions can be shared afterwards as well, together with the slides. So I'm not sure if that's something doable. Just a question asked in Q&A.
Yeah, my experience is that the Q&As are not stored once
Mhm.
the recording is stopped. But yeah. But
Okay.
Can we do a quick screenshot, maybe?
yeah, I can see what I can do.
Yep. All
But
right.
we are great. Thank you for everybody for staying on for 1 hour and 40 minutes now. So with that, we just want to say thank you from the MIA specialist group and from the ICA specialist group, and wish you all a great day or morning or evening or whatever it is for you where you are. Okay,
Indeed.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good day. Bye.
Bye-bye.